You can almost hear Bill Maher trying to do the math in real time. Wait a minute. Britain is not just saying kids cannot buy cigarettes. Britain is saying that if you were born after January 1st, 2009, you will never be legally sold cigarettes. Not at 18, not at 25, not at 40, not ever. And that's the real questions get slipped out. Do adults get to basically make bad decisions anymore? At least in Britain. And that question matters more than the cigarette. Nobody with a functioning brain needs a lecture about cigarettes being healthy. They're not. Smoking kills people. It's one of the leading factors of why my mom passed away. It wrecks lungs. It drains families. It turns addiction into a slow-motion tax on the body. And that part is not in dispute. But liberty is not measured on whether the government lets you do what's good for you. Liberty is measured by whether the government still recognizes your right to make a choice it does not like. So today we ask, is Britain banning cigarettes or banning adulthood? Welcome to Go Right. I am Peter Boykin. I'm your host. I am the Constitutionalist for Liberty. You can find more about this on GoRightNews.com, PeterBoykin.com, and the music side of our movement. Check out GoRightMusic.com. Now, this Bill Maher interview that I watched, it hit something much bigger than smoking. It exposed the mindset of the modern Western nanny state. A government can struggle to protect its citizens from violence and radicalization and antisemitism and homophobia and a cultural breakdown, yet somehow it always finds the energy to control what peaceful adults are allowed to buy. And that is a part that us as Americans need to wake up and notice. Because in the UK's new tobacco law is being sold as a public health victory. Officials call it the creation of a smoke-free generation, which sounds clean, it sounds compassionate, and it sounds like one of those polished government phrases that always wraps in good intentions. But underneath the wording is something much more aggressive. The state is not simply saying children should not buy cigarettes. And most people agree with that. Children shouldn't be smoking cigarettes. The state's saying, though, even when this generation becomes adults, we still do not trust them with that choice. And that is a very different thing. Folks, we had prohibition here in the United States years ago, and that didn't go very well. So, if a person is born after January 1st, 2009, you got to think about it. Somebody's born December 31st, 2008, they're allowed to smoke. But no, if they're born January 1st, 2009, it could one day be old enough to vote, old enough to get married, old enough to sign a mortgage, old enough to join the military, old enough to pay taxes, old enough to run a business, old enough to raise children, old enough to bury their own parents, but still be told by the government that buying a cigarette is beyond their legal capacity. And that's not public health. That's not public health alone. That's really managed adulthood. And once a government gets comfortable managing adulthood, that target never stays in place, for one. Like I said, once you give the government a little bit of power, they'll take more and more and more. So today it might be tobacco. Tomorrow it might be sugar. Then it might be alcohol. Then it's speech. And then it's parental rights. And then political opinion that the ruling class decides are too dangerous for the public to hear. And this is how things work. The government does not usually show up announcing tyranny. It usually shows up saying, we are only trying to help. I think Ronald Reagan said something like that. The worst thing to fear is the government saying, we're here to help. Now, let's be fair, because fairness does matter. There is a real public health argument here. Cigarettes are addictive. Tobacco companies spent decades selling death in pretty packages. Families have watched loved ones disappear behind oxygen tanks and hospital bills. Health systems absorb the cost of choices people made years earlier. So yes, a government has a role in warning people. A government has a role in stopping companies from marketing to children. And a government has a role in punishing retailers who sell to minors. But we don't need that here in our constitutional republic when it comes down to a free society that doesn't respect the individual. Because any free society that still respects the individual, like the constitutional republic we have, must draw a line between protecting children and permanently supervising adults. That line is where liberty lives. Now, Bill Maher's reaction worked because it was not really about cigarettes. It was about an instinct to ask, wait, who gave the government that kind of power over a grown person? I think he was like, when did England become, or UK become so liberal, so leftist? And that question should not be partisan. I mean, everybody's got to ask these questions when it comes to liberty. You can hate smoking and still oppose this kind of ban. You can support public health and still reject government overreach. You can want fewer people addicted to nicotine and still believe adults should not be treated like permanent wards of the state. And that is where mature policy lives, not in slogans, not in virtue signaling, not in pretending every restriction is automatically compassion. Then the conversation shifted to a broader condition of Britain. And that is where things got even more uncomfortable.
So your country is banning cigarettes after 2000, from anyone who was born after 2009. Banning cigarettes.
Under 18, yes.
Right, well, yeah. I guess that's what it is. If you were born after 2009,
yeah, do the math, yeah.
You'll be it's illegal to buy cigarettes. Why? I mean, don't people get to make their own mistakes? Don't we get to do what we want to do? I mean, you're an adult and you can't have a cigarette if you want. I mean, every time I think this country's too woke, I look at what's going on in your country and I'm like, wow, these people are really fucked up.
Well, does that make you feel better?
It does not make me feel better, but it puts some perspective in this situation.
Yeah. I mean, okay, personally, I don't agree with a complete ban. I do agree in not selling cigarettes to under 18s, but I don't agree personally.
But how did England get so leftist?
Bill Maher brought up claims that the United Arab Emirates had concerns about sending students to the United Kingdom because of radicalization. The response pushed back and saying that a lot of fear-mongering about Britain has been exaggerated online, especially claims about London being a so-called no-go zone. Now, I'm going to remind you folks that in England, they get in trouble for saying things that are true. So they have to be careful on what they say and what they do.
I mean, I've read that the United Arab Emirates will not send their students to the UK because they're afraid they're going to be radicalized.
I think that might be some of the fake news that you're concerned about. Because there are plenty of UAE students from the Gulf.
Well, maybe now,
in the UK.
but this is something they did recently. They said they're going to end scholarships to the UK.
And where did you read that? Because I mean, again, there's been an awful lot of stuff on social media. A lot of the fear mongering about the UK right now is whipped up. This idea somehow London is a no-go zone. It's full of people walking around the Sharia law and all that on every street. A lot of it's whipped up.
But hang on, two Jews did get stabbed this week. Just somebody went just Jew hunting.
They did, and that is horrific and tragic and abhorrent.
Now, this pushback ultimately is partly fair. Social media loves running and turning complicated countries into cartoon versions of themselves. Britain is not one giant collapse meme. London is not one single headline. But there are good people, there's peaceful communities, there's decent families, and normal daily life that never makes it to viral political clips. I mean, and around the world, people see America as a certain view, but we're so diverse here that that view's very wrong in most cases. But there's also a danger in hiding behind the word fear-mongering every time someone points to a real problem. That's the biggest problem, is that real problems do exist, and people usually try to brush them aside. Now, Bill Maher mentioned Jews being stabbed. The response correctly called it horrific, tragic, and abhorrent. But that is where the conversation should begin, not end. When Jewish citizens, any citizens, are being targeted, when synagogues and other neighborhoods, Jewish neighborhoods, or anybody else other than, just Jews religious-wise, need heightened security, when police and political leaders are forced to reassure a community that should never have to wonder and whether it is safe to walk down the street, something's gone wrong. And that's because we can say it here, they do have an overload of Muslims and radical Muslims in the UK who are making the lives of Jewish people there harder, and the lives of Christians as well. We can go on and on that all day long, but that's not what we're talking about today. But here is what should bother everybody. A government strong enough to ban future adults from buying cigarettes should be strong enough to protect its citizens from targeted violence. A government confident enough to regulate personal habits should be confident enough to confront extremism. Honestly, confront it. A government willing to police lifestyle choices should not become vague, nervous, or evasive when the issue is public safety. And that's the failure of modern managerial states. It is often bold against the peaceful citizens and cautious against the dangerous ones. It lectures the law-abiding. It monitors the ordinary. It regulates the compliant. And then when actual threats appear, suddenly everything becomes complicated, sensitive, nuanced, and impossible to say out loud. I've been saying it for years. Our politicians worry about the low-bearing fruit. They make up things. They make up issues. Anything to direct them away from fixing the hard-line issues that need fixing. And folks, in America, us Americans, we shouldn't laugh at Britain as if we're going to be immune to this, because we're not. We saw quickly during COVID how public health language became a weapon against liberty. We saw how people were censored, they were banned, they were shamed, they were deplatformed, they were treated like enemies for asking questions that later turned out to be reasonable. We saw government pressure, big tech obedience, social punishment, and a culture of fear all working together. They stripped us from our constitutional rights, and yet nothing's still being done about it. And that experience should have taught us something. The issue is not whether public health matters. And a lot of people don't talk about it because it was so painful to talk about what happened during that period. People want to erase it from their mind because they just don't like it. But it happened. So the issue is not whether public health matters, because it does. The issue is whether public health outranks every other liberty the moment officials declare an emergency, a crisis, a risk, or a moral clause. Because, one liberty becomes conditional. Once liberty becomes conditional, it stops being liberty. Here in America, the Constitution is supposed to slow government down. It's supposed to remind politicians that citizens are not property of the state. The Bill of Rights does not exist because government naturally respects freedom. It exists because government naturally expands unless it's restrained. And yes, this can hit hard in North Carolina, where I live, and many other states. North Carolina, Virginia, is a tobacco state. Our history, our farms, our economy, and our rural communities have all been shaped by tobacco in one way or the other. That does not mean we romanticize smoking. It does not mean we ignore the damage. It does not mean we pretend addiction is freedom. But it does mean we understand the difference between education and prohibition. We understand that real people are attached to these policies: farmers, shop owners, workers, families, communities that have already watched industries rise, fall, and get regulated into oblivion by people who never had to live with the consequences. Here in my county, Alamance County, and across North Carolina, the better answer is not to turn adults into children. The better answer is honest education, strong families, parental involvement, enforcement against selling to minors, and a culture that teaches responsibility instead of waiting for government to ban every temptation. That is the part too many politicians miss. You cannot regulate a people into virtue. You cannot ban your way into wisdom. You cannot create strong citizens by treating them like weak subjects. At some point, a free society has to trust adults enough to let them be adults. That means they will make mistakes. That means they will make decisions and choices we dislike. That means some people would choose badly even after being warned. But the alternative is worse. The alternative is a society where the government becomes parent, pastor, doctor, teacher, censor, and referee all at once. And when that happens, the citizen does not become healthier. The citizen becomes smaller. So the real question is not whether cigarettes are good. They're not. The real question is whether government power becomes good just because it is aimed at something bad. That is where I say no. Bad habits do not justify unlimited authority. Public health does not erase personal liberty. Protecting children does not give the state permission to permanently infantilize adults. And in a constitutional republic does not exist to manufacture perfect people. It exists to protect free people. Free people need truth. Free people need responsibility. Free people need consequences. But free people also need the space to choose. I mean, people go, "Oh God, why did you let this happen?" Well, God gave us free will. That means we have to deal with the consequences of having free will. Otherwise, we're just slaves for what? Can't ever do anything that's a little off. We might as well not even have a life, right? You know, liberty without responsibility becomes chaos. But responsibility without liberty becomes control. And control is exactly what too many governments are getting comfortable with. Now, this Bill Maher exchange on that video should make Americans pause. Not because Britain is uniquely broken, not because America is perfect, but because the same mindset is already here. The mindset that says experts should decide more and citizens should decide less. The mindset that says government knows best. The mindset that says freedom is acceptable only when it produces approved outcomes. This is not an American ideal. The America idea is harder, messier, louder, riskier, and freer. And it will take that over, I'll take that over managed obedience every single time. Hopefully you will too. Again, this is Peter Boykin, your Constitutionalist for Liberty. This has been Go Right with me, You can read more about this on GoRightNews.com, find it at PeterBoykin.com, and check out GoRightMusic.com. Stand for liberties, defend responsibility, keep government in its lane, and always go right. God bless. Peace.